So Robert Cohen is a writer and performer, born in London, raised in Dayton, San Diego and Eastbourne. Robert spent his early career in journalism before making a leap of faith into showbiz. He's won acclaim for his solo shows, written numerous theatre scripts, and even a dark traffic comedy called High Viz about a traffic warden with a stalker. Architecture for Beginners is Rob's first novel, and I'll hand over to him to introduce it to you and do the first reading.
Right, well, thank you, Denise. Yes, Architecture for Beginners, for those who don't know already, through my relentless plugging of it on social media, is about two guys who meet in middle life, having been close friends in childhood, until one of them started having success as a footballer and cut the other one for dead. And the other one, Alex, grew up to be an architect. And when they bump into each other in midlife, Alex is in all kinds of trouble with his architectural practice and in his marriage. And Reggie has recently been widowed. His wife, in fact, drowned herself, which is pertinent to the first reading. And he's recently retired, so he's at a bit of a loose end. Both of them are at a crossroads. And they meet up again. And Reggie has the bright idea of getting Alex, or commissioning him at least, to build a full-size football stadium on his country estate. And this bit I'm going to read first of all occurs just after New Year, when Reggie has rather unwisely had a big New Year gathering, which seemed to go well at first, and then he got a bit maudlin and a bit coked up and stuff, and has ended up making quite a scene and disappearing from the scene. And the next day, New Year's Day, Alex is trying to find him on the estate, and he also takes the opportunity to look around and scope the place out for possible sites where he might put the stadium if it gets built. And so to the big metal shed. Nothing to see here, I figured. Just hay bales and tools and maybe, who knows, maybe one of those jumbo lawnmowers with a tractor to drag it along in its wake. That, the big draggy lawnmower, that was nowhere apparent, but there was ample compensation. For in that shed, by the light of the weak winter sun that followed me through the door, I counted at least a dozen other assorted motor contraptions. "Oh, of course," muttered I, full of green-eyed contempt. "Of course. A playboy, football legend, why would he not have his own motor museum?" Not that they were all museum pieces. Reggie's Porsche was there, stashed alongside a white Range Rover, but practical items such as these were far outnumbered by the vintage exhibits, which included a DeLorean, a sand yellow BMW motorbike and sidecar, something ancient that looked like a Model T, and I wonder, am I souping this up in my delirium? No, I'm not. It really was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. It was surely, though, not the real thing. Well, I don't mean the real thing. I didn't expect it to fly or anything. But maybe. No, it must be a replica, not the actual one from the film. That, for sure, he'd keep in the house. He'd park it in the hall. He'd make it the focus of any and every media call he granted. It couldn't be the real thing. He'd not just shove it up the end of a shed, leave it there, neglect it. I picked my way through the other exhibits and stood there, staring. I stared, and then, once having glanced around to confirm I was alone, I clambered up into the driver's seat. Now, what could I say? I wanted something to say, something American, something to quote from Dick Van Dyke. Nothing was coming to mind. All I could think of was the child catcher. "Children, come and get your custard." No, not custard. What was it he said? Ice cream, lollipops, all free. They made 6 of them, you know. I nearly shat my pants. For the film, I mean, they made 6. Not all of them worked, of course. Where was he? I couldn't see a thing, could barely even hear. He was talking so gently. Yeah, there was one fully drivable, one that could take on the road, you know. There was another, smaller one. It was one on that blow-up raft. That was just a shell. Don't remember about the rest. That there, of course, that's a replica. Of course, I said, only now starting to make out the silhouette of a head and an arm lolling out the driver's side window of the Range Rover. Sorry, I said, suddenly aware that I'd had no formal permission to be where I was. I clambered to my feet. No, stay where you are. I sat down again, though feeling now a bit stupid and not at all like being Dick Van Dyke, let alone Robert Helpman. Scrubbed up well, this old girl. He patted the sill of the Range Rover. I mean, considering it's been under the sea, a bit like Chitty. Oh no, not Chitty, more like that Lotus in The Spy Who Loved Me. Both Ian Fleming. You what? Ian Fleming books, both of them, both based on, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and the spy who. Sorry, are you? I'd only now digested the significance of Reggie's previous comments. You're saying that Range Rover? Oh yeah, she done it in this. Drove it into the sea. Of course, it wasn't under for long, couple of hours, if that. Took a lot of flushing though. Weeks it took them, even though they told me, absolutely promised it'd be done real quick. It's important, I said. I need it back in a week. After all the doings, after the coppers have had it, make sure there's no foul play or anything. He paused. Was he crying, I wondered? Crying or simply taking a breath? So this says to me, a week, no problem at all, my man. Fucking grease monkeys. 6 weeks later, they show up, pleased as punch. There she is, see what a good job we've done. I think, alright, I'll let it go. No harm done, not really, no one died. Well, not that week, at least. Only then, of course, I get the bill. It's twice what they said at the start. I told him, you can whistle for it. He sighed. Another lawsuit. I thought you were still in your room, I said. You what, mate? I didn't expect to... I thought you were still in your room. Everyone did. At my room? Why do you think that? I've been here all night. In here? In the car? Oh, posh seats, new upholstery, everything. Right. Listen, mate, I'm sorry, really sorry. For what? What do you think? Last night, of course. Oh, don't be silly. Nah, I was out of line totally. And believe me, I don't care what all them coke-hounds thought. I'm just sorry to have embarrassed you, stupid musos. I'm sorry? The band. They weren't to know, of course, no malice aforethought. But see, that song, that was special for me and Den's. Sang it at our wedding, duet, that and something stupid. Of course, when they started up with it, I was delighted. You saw me. But then, I don't know, all them words about dying in cars, it just... He started gently weeping. Awkward. Awkward, for sure, at the best of times, but all the more so when you're perched in a fantastical flying car way over on the far side of the room from the afflicted. I climbed down from my mount and began to weave my way across to the Range Rover. What I might do when I got there, I could only guess. Hug him, perhaps? Through the window? Awkwardness on awkwardness. What had I embarked on? To my immense relief, he started talking again. Funny, he sniffed. I did think at one time of turning this into a motor museum. Oh, did you? Good idea. Yeah, but health and safety, it's more trouble than it's worth. More trouble than it's worth. And he's after a football stadium. Listen, Reggie, I've had a great time. Thanks so much for your kindness, but I really will need to be getting back. So if we could maybe go in the house and have a chat about your various projects. Projects? Oh, no, sorry, mate, not in the mood. Well, I appreciate that, but I really do need to be... Tomorrow, yeah? First thing tomorrow. Right now, I just want a bit of quality time with the old girl. Old girl. Quality time with the old girl. Now, of course, hearkening back with wiser ears, I've cause to wonder, was his allusion to the car or to its former owner?
Thank you very much for that. I have to ask, where did you get the idea of an architect? An architect meeting has-been footballer?
It's fairly banal. I was in Eastbourne, staying with my parents many years ago, about getting on for 20 years or something, and I was driving near their house and reflected that an old school friend of mine lived nearby, or at least his friends did, and I had a momentary thought of bumping into him and a vision of the two of us going to a pub and sitting by the fire and catching up, and I thought, maybe there's a play in that. I thought, no, there isn't a play in that, but there might be a novel. Okay, what could he be? One of the... or maybe a footballer. Yeah, a writer and a footballer. I thought, no, don't be lazy, not a writer. Make it something else. I thought, how about an architect? Yeah, an architect. And then I realised I'd saddled myself with two things that I had to research and read a lot of books about. But anyway, there it was. It was set in stone, and yeah.
Set in stone. I was going to ask you, were you into football or architecture before any of that? Did you have any inkling about either?
I was a little bit into football. Mainly because I'd made an effort to get into it, because I was a bit jealous of my two brothers, who one of whom is here tonight, who were able to talk to my dad about sport, and I realised that I couldn't. I could talk to him about other things, but not sport, and I thought, well, maybe I need to get more into football, because I sort of liked it and I enjoyed watching the international competitions, the World Cup and stuff. But I always had to find some political reason to be interested, like when Brazil played Italy in the World Cup of, what year it was? Sorry?
82.
82. No, I was thinking later than that. I think it was 94, wasn't it? At the final. And I had to think, okay, this is interesting to me because Italy have just Berlusconi's become head of this coalition that has sort of like at least one fascist member, and so it's really important that Italy shouldn't win. He gets all the credit. I had to do that kind of thing. At that time, I still couldn't imagine how anyone could watch a whole 90 minutes of football and not zone out and zone in and stuff, and I sort of pretty much...
Is that why you support Arsenal?
Sorry? Yeah. No offence. And I taught myself to actually be able to do that, yeah. And but nevertheless, I needed to know a lot more about it to write this book, and I needed to know a huge amount more about architecture, because there isn't too much actual football in the thing. There's a couple of games he plays with his kids, basically, but obviously there's quite a lot more architecture, and I needed Alex to be convincing as someone who was an architect, even if he's not talking about it a lot, so there was quite a lot of reading about that, and if nothing else, I now know at least what my favourite kind of column is, and it's Doric.
There you go. And you've acted a lot in Shakespeare, and you've written scripts as well, a lot of scripts, award-winning scripts.
Not as good as Shakespeare's.
Not as good as Shakespeare's, maybe, but still award-winning. And I just wondered how that, because this is your first novel, how much that dramatic side of your writing life affected how you approached the novel.
Good question. It is, in fact, my first published novel, but there were two before, and both of them started life as plays. And both of them are far less satisfactory, I think, than this, which was always a novel from the start. But it might be noted that there is quite a lot of dialogue in it, and I suppose that's a reflection of my playwrightly tendencies. Mind you, who was it who won a Pulitzer, was it, for writing a book about Lincoln that... had been a novel, had been a play, and still has all the character names in it, or quite a lot. Lincoln, you know.
George Saunders.
George Saunders, okay,
Lincoln
thank you.
Bardo.
Yeah, okay, there we go. But I don't have all the character names in mine, and it never was a play in the first place.
But apart from that.
Yeah.
Because in the book, I mean, the characters, all their lives are unravelling, really. I don't think there's a single person in there who's on it at all, really. And I just wondered, they're all so dysfunctional. How hard was it to keep tabs on each of their lives? Because it's a very intricate plot in some ways.
Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, it helps if for many years no one takes an interest in what you're doing and you have many years in which to come back to it and refine it, which happened, I suppose there must have been... Well, I know there was. There's actually a diary entry. I mean, you asked how I got the idea. There's a diary entry from 2006, because I've been keeping a diary since I was 16 or something, which says something like, spent the day plotting, writing constructing the plot for a novel called Architecture for Beginners. I had the title that early. Which is about a footballer being haunted by the ghost of his dead wife. Now, this is not primarily about a footballer being haunted by the ghost of his dead wife, but there is a supernatural element in it. But that was clearly something that I came up with as a plot in itself for something, and clearly I ended up thinking, oh, that one could go with the thing about the two old school friends, and I can work that in. I'm not sure there isn't something else in there that was taken from some other idea that I had. It'll come back to me probably.
That's an amalgamation of lots of ideas you've had since 2006, I guess, to figure them all out.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's called the dark comedy, and there obviously is a lot of comedy in there. And I think without the comedy, it is very tragic. It'd be really dark, very tragic comedy. And I wondered, how difficult was it for you to keep that balance of tragedy and comedy?
I don't know is the boring answer. What I would say is that I've always had trouble keeping comedy out of my things.
Right.
It always seems to, whether I'm writing a play or a novel, comedy always seems to work its way up like sort of weeds through tarmac. And yet when I've consciously set out to write a comedy exclusively, it's generally fallen rather flat and not been very funny. But I do think, to get a bit philosophical, that life isn't... I don't know. There is no drama without comedy in life, really, or very little. I mean, you can find it in the darkest places. And I sort of remember things like Woody Allen at certain points trying to make films that were very serious, like Interiors and September. And it's like, you thought, this is not going to be funny, it's not going to... just stripping out any kind of jokes. And it just comes across as totally artificial and unreal.
Mm. I think what's interesting as well is that a lot of the book is reflective. It's Alex thinking back over how he's got to a certain point.
Yes.
And he can see the humour from a distance, almost. Whereas when he was going through it, it was a very different feeling for him.
Yeah.
With his family, etc. Yeah. Reggie, the footballer, he rings a lot of bells when you read him. He's a very... he's not even an unusual ex-footballer who goes off the rails, really. And I wondered if, without libelling anyone, was there somebody in particular who inspired his character for you?
I think people will find, as you say, various echoes. I can tell you some of the people I read biographies of. They included Paul Gascoigne, Tony Adams, Vinnie Jones. Who was the other one? There was... oh God, what's the guy who used to go out with Ulrika Johnson? You know. Stan Collymore, thank you very much. He went out with her as well. No, it wasn't him, it was Stan Collymore. So that's where the dogging came from.
Oh, that's where that came.
Yeah. Not there's a lot of it in there, but there's some references.
That
was going to be the next question.
Like what you know.
Well, he obviously did, yeah.
I hope that was research as well, yes. I think at that point we were going to have another reading, which I think is Reggie oriented, so perhaps now would be a good time to have that one.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. This is from a bit later in the book. where Alex has kind of fallen into pretty much living at Cullen Place in Bedfordshire, which is Reggie's stately pile. And because he's fallen out with his wife, it's not very easy for him to see his kids, even if he's at home in the town on the coast where he lives. So a couple of times he gets them up there to Bedfordshire for a weekend, and one of these occasions they go on what Reggie says is going to be a magical mystery tour, though he quickly lets slip that it's Woburn Zoo and Safari Park. He gets a bit out of hand, basically, and here we go. My own very genuine excitement was dented by the eventual realisation that the trip, though Reggie's treat in theory, was mine in practice. 40 quid it cost me, and that was just to get us in, never mind the inevitable chicken nuggets. Our host, it seemed, had failed to bring sufficient cash. Any cash, in fact, and as he once again fatuously explained, he doesn't believe in credit cards. I wasn't surprised, of course. Rich people are always pulling these stunts. It's how they stay rich. Despite the financial embarrassment, Reggie was very much still in charge of the venture, and it was his decreed opinion that we should start with the zoo and leave the safari, the best bit, till last. Thus agreed, he parked up, decanted his compliment, locked the car, then declaimed, "Last one to the sea lions is a bag of shit!" And off he went, balletically weaving his way across the car park, effortlessly dodging the other patrons and leaving us in his dust. Well, me at least. Rachel and Lulu were giving good chase, tearing after Uncle Reggie, giggling their way out of sight. "Why doesn't he get some kids of his own?" I muttered. "He's got some kids of his own," said Shelley. "Yeah, I know." Shelley, by the way, is Reggie's PA. I should have mentioned that. "He's got some kids of his own," said Shelley. "Yeah, I know." We followed at a more leisurely pace, eventually separating completely from the advance party, with agreement to reconvene later for lunch. Mogg would have been horrified at my leaving the girls to the immature care of Reggie Cullen. Maybe that made me more inclined to do it. That and the realisation that he and the girls were similarly slight of attention span. While they raced through every enclosure and on to the next, Shelley and I were able to devote some proper quality time to the more quality creatures, the lemurs, for example. In any case, Uncle Reggie was going down a storm with the girls. I really couldn't compete, and I wasn't at that point inclined to try. Maybe I should have done. Maybe what later occurred was inevitable. Reggie never could resist the encouragement of an adoring crowd. I remember one time, years ago, reading an interview with him in one of the Sunday papers. They asked him, in this interview, why he thought he had such a tendency to get into trouble on the football field, as he'd done once again just lately, incurring a ban and a fine for flicking V's at a reprimanding ref. He said he'd no idea, though he noted that it was rare for him to get into rows during training. It was more usually on match days that his demons found their way out of the bottle. The interviewer wondered if perhaps the crucial ingredient was the presence of an indulgent audience. "What do you mean?" said Reggie. "You mean I start showing off?" "Yeah, that's probably it." Showing off, indeed. Never had he a more indulgent audience than he did that day at Woburn. It was bad enough out in the open, but once back in the car as we plied the safari trail, things reached a whole new level of ghastly. Like a latter-day Percy Edwards he was. For every beast there was a mimicking, and every mimicking, no matter how inept, brought forth screams of laughter from the back seat. This, in turn, egged Reggie on to be more and more outrageously hilarious, thus generating more viciously circular giggling from Rachel and Lulu. I thought I was going to have to say something, but in the end it was Shelley, waged between them in the back, who stepped up instinctively to play the bad guy. "Shut up! Will you shut up, please? I can't hear myself think." "Think?" said Reggie. "What do you want to think for? Pretty girl like you. You want it. Please, Reggie, please just shut up for a minute. I can't stand it. Please, just shut up." And so he did. They all did. A silence descended on the entire party, a deep, sulky silence which wasn't to be broken until we were fully inside the heart of beastly darkness. There, on the safari trail, an expansive ring of steel creates the illusion of free-range existence for a wide variety of deadly creatures. Within that ring of steel, however, the most vicious and unpredictable of all the beasts are confined within a further ring of steel, a special enclosure unto themselves. It's called the Tiger Woods, ho-ho. And in order to gain access, you have to make your way through 2 sets of electric gates. It was once through the second set of gates that Reggie stopped the car. I thought nothing of it at first. There's no rule against stopping, as long as you leave room for other cars to get past you. Though, in fact, he hadn't bothered. "It's a bit small," said Rachel. "The space they've got. In the jungle, they'd have a lot more room." "Right. And you'd never see them." "Well, they're not here on Earth just to be seen by the likes of us." "True. Very true. So why don't you get out? Go on, go set 'em free." "Oh, ha. You're right, not a good idea. Next thing you'd be asking to keep one in the house." "Look," said Lulu, "there's one." "Oh, so there is. Do you see it, Ray?" "Yes, of course I do. I'm not blind." "You don't have to be. He's got stripes. They're for a purpose." "Alex?" I looked sideways at Reggie, surprised to hear him speak for the first time since Shelley's outburst. "What are you doing?" I said, though I could see exactly what he was doing. Slowly and deliberately, well nigh strip-teasingly, he was removing his seatbelt, smiling all the while, a wicked smile, the like of which I'd never seen before. Just for a brief, stupid moment, I imagined he was going to kiss me. "Alex," he purred, "do you dare me to run around the car?" "Eh?" I was still thinking about the kiss. "Do you dare me to run around the car?" I laughed. "No, I don't. Don't be stupid." He turned and looked to his fan club in the back. "What about you, girls? Shall I do it?" "Yes," said a 2/3 majority. "Come to think of it," I said, "I don't even like being stopped here. Come on, let's go." "Go? You're mad." "No, really, what if you couldn't get it started again? Come on, let's just, what, Jesus Christ," he was out and slamming the door. "Reggie, fucking stop it, get back in, Reggie!" In the 10 or so seconds it took him to circle the car, I was afflicted with a series of visions. First, I was forced to break the news to Reggie's children. Then I had to explain to my colleagues how I'd carelessly thrown away their next meal ticket. And finally must I tell all to the slavering press beast, seeing my honest words twisted to condemn me out of my own mouth for having lost our nation the best Prime Minister we never had. Worse than all this, though, was the thought that Mogg, for evermore unto doomsday, could hold me responsible for any and every problem with the girls, caused as it surely would be by the everlasting trauma of seeing a man eaten alive. Fucking hell, that was great! Richie, fuck, don't ever, what a buzz, fucking hell, you gotta get some. What? Go on, you now. Fuck off. Go on, Dad. Yes, go on. You two shut up. And you, get us out of here. Come on, let's go. Not till you do it, chicken shit. Call me what you like. I'd rather be live chicken shit than dead tiger food. Even as I said this, I was aware that the nearest tiger had batted barely an eyelid throughout Reggie's little stunt. That, though, was not the point. Who could say what other stripy meat seekers might have been lurking amidst the trees? Just drive, will you? After all, that's what they're made for, to blend in. No, he said. No way, I ain't going nowhere, not till you do it too. Shelley now joined the debate. Really, I think Alex is right. Shut up, bitch! Do not talk to Shelley like that. Sorry, love. You know I don't mean it. He turned round, took Shelley's hand and kissed it. You know that, don't you? Yes, she said. I love her, he said to the girls. I'd be nothing without my Shell. Then he turned round to face me again. Right then, you can have a go. Jesus Christ, you're not still on that, are you? Start the car! And he did. He did start the car. But only when the next one came back. Only when the next one back came and honked him on his way. Right then, chicken boy, reckon we've earned ourselves a cup of char, don't you? No, I don't. I just want to go home, if you don't mind. Oh, did I overstep the mark? Yes. Blimey, anybody think you was the one in danger? Can we just go, please? I know I come out of this story as a bit of a sourpuss, but the way I was seeing things, I was the founder of the feast. Yet again, I'd paid for a trip suggested by Reggie, and, more to the point, I'd been made to look a dick in front of my kids, who, and here's another point, that fucker put my kids in danger. Okay, so it all ended happily. The girls had a laugh, Reggie got to show off, no harm done. But what if those monsters had, one of those monsters had got him? Much as he deserved his mauling, there's no way I wouldn't have jumped out and tried to help. Christ knows what I'd have done. Maybe I'm deluding myself, but delusions in my situation, my mind's all over the place, but still I'd have tried to do something. I'd have leapt out of that car, and in my panic, all I'm saying is, in all the confusion with other tigers creeping around the undergrowth, it's not too much to suppose another of those sneaky fuckers might have got into the car and had a right royal picnic.
I think it's fair to say that that's fairly typical Reggie behaviour. He doesn't really think before he does a lot of the time, does he? And in that section as well, you also mentioned the media, the Sunday papers, and he has a real love-hate relationship with them. And reading through the book, it seems like the media are a character in their own right. And I wondered, was that a conscious decision that you decided on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it could be argued that I don't take a very favourable view of the media in the book, but I'm not sure I take that favourable view of footballers or architects either. It's true that I used to be a journalist, and I did, as well as working for various very small and very exploitative small publishing firms. I also worked for a while at the Times. There's an irony in working for the Times, because at that time in the early thousands, I was they were about to do Pravda, the David Hare, Howard Brenton play, pretty much about Rupert Murdoch at Chichester, and I was on at my agent to try and get me, well, a casting at least, which she totally failed to do. And on the day that I walked into Fortress Wapping to do my first subbing shift for the Times, I bitterly reflected that instead of being in a play at Chichester about Rupert Murdoch, I was going to work for Rupert Murdoch. What can you do?
What can you do?
Yeah.
Money. That's a shame.
Well, it was very well paid, and we were surprisingly well treated with a subsidised canteen, which is always nice. None of that at the latest magazine. But of course, eventually, because I was just a casual, I worked for a few months on news, and then became surplus requirements, and then I got a phone call a while later, and would I come and do some subbing on the business section. I thought, I know nothing about business, but I'll do it. And it's amazing what you can become interested in because you've got to do it for a living. So for a while there, I was actually interested in the bit at the end of the news when they talk about the markets and stuff. But eventually, of course, they had cutbacks, and I got cut back. And there's a guy there called Dennis Rink, who was my supervisor, and he was good enough to say to me, Robert, we're having cutbacks, and I don't think I'm going to be able to use you again. And that was a really nice thing to do, because my experience in journalism is that if we think people aren't always very polite in showbiz about letting you know about stuff, especially jobs you haven't got, they've got even fewer social skills in journalism, is my experience. And if people don't want you anymore, they don't tell you, the phone just stops ringing. And Dennis was actually good enough to let me know the situation. Actually, now I'm onto this kind of thing. I was working for a few years before that. In fact, this was what gave rise to my going back into showbiz, starting to do acting again, was that I lost a job working for a listings company in London. And my editor there, one day after I'd been going out for about a year, freelancing 2 or 3 days a week, and it might be noted that though it was freelance and there was no kind of fringe benefits in the way of holiday pay or anything, nevertheless they wanted you there on particular set days, almost as if you were, a staff member. But anyway, point is, eventually the day came when he called me aside and he said, "Robert, can I have a word? Look, we've just got a big new contract to do some stuff for a client, which means that we're going to be in a position to take on an extra member of staff." And in my head, I'm going, "Oh no, I'm already commuting up to bloody London 2 or 3 days a week, and now he's going to ask me to do it full time. I'm going to have to decide if I want to commute to London as a full-time thing. I just want to write and do all that kind of thing." And then he finishes the sentence and says, "So we won't be needing you anymore." And I thought, wouldn't it have been nice if that had been my decision to make? And then I talk about people having a lack of social skills. He then said, "Oh, well, at least you won't have to do all that horrible commuting anymore." And again, I thought maybe that was the thing for me to say to make him feel better rather than him saying it to make me feel worse.
It doesn't have quite the same ring, does it?
No.
No, not really.
No.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm happy to open up to questions if anybody would like to ask Rob anything.
Can I ask why you started writing a diary at 16?
It was Christmas, I suppose, Christmas 1979, and my mum gave me, I think it was probably in my Christmas stocking. She was very good with Christmas stockings until the Christmas that she decided she wasn't doing it anymore. But that was a few years off at that point. And I got a little diary. It was a World of Sport diary. Rest in peace, Dickie Davis, recently deceased. And I thought, oh, well, I've got a diary. I suppose I better start keeping it. And I started doing that and never really stopped, although it quickly became rather a chore. And I look at my old diaries and see that apparently I did diligently write it up every evening, and now it's often a case of catching up after a week or so and looking in my desk diary to see if there is any clues about what I did and engagements I had. And so I'm still going with it. I think I'd feel a bit weird if I stopped now.
Do you think you'll ever get to publish your diaries in the end?
No, I don't think I'm not being falsely modest. I really don't think there's enough of interest in there. You read people like Alan Bennett's diaries, and I think probably from very early on he sort of knew that these had potential to be, and Tony Benn, of course, people who are very much writing with a view to being published one day, and I've never really. I obviously write with the idea that someone at some point is going to read them, apart from me, but it's certainly not with the idea of being published. No.
Okay. Maybe in edited highlights at some point.
Who knows? But they are useful to find out things like, for instance, that thing about the early thing and the fact that the title was there from the beginning, which is very rare for me. Very often it's the last thing I get. And also sometimes you find out that you thought something at the time, which is the direct opposite of what you now think. You know, there are certain films that I'm liable to say, that was shit, and then I come across the entry from when I saw it at the cinema, and I say, which was, sometimes say that it was excellent or something. So have I misremembered? Or some things are shrinkers, of course. Like you have a grower. I also have the phenomenon of the shrinker. Like, for instance, the English Patient, which I really enjoyed at the time, and you couldn't pay me to see it now. And the King's Speech. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Shrinker.
Anybody else?
Hello. Sorry, it's not up to me.
Your question.
I was just wondering, having played Arthur Miller, whether you had the ride down Mount Morgan in mind behind that sequence, because there's a moment in the ride down Mount Morgan where the central character decides on a safari in Africa to stand up to a lion which represents his guilt about himself. And and he stares it down while his, interestingly, I've noticed, yes, while his wife and daughter are saying, "Daddy, what the hell are you doing?" And it gives him some kind of rebirth. I mean, just because the only plays I know are Arthur Miller plays, it reminded me of that play. And I was wondering if you...
Right, okay, the short answer is no. He meant me having played Arthur Miller, unless you have as well.
No, I was meaning that.
Yes, in a play called Reno some years ago. No, I've got to say that I don't think The Ride Down Mount Morgan is one of his masterpieces. In fact, I was going to be in a production of it some years ago, and it got cancelled, and I wasn't entirely gutted, not only because it was going to be a huge amount of stuff to learn. Actually, that reminds me of something, if I can sort of like say something totally off the subject, but concerning Arthur Miller, which you might like. When I was at the University of East Anglia in the early 80s, Miller published a book called... this has nothing to do with the subject, by the way, at all, but it might be mildly amusing. He published a book called Salesman in Beijing, which was about him having gone to Beijing to be present when they put on a production of Death of a Salesman. And because Chris Bigsby, who taught me, was one of the... most renowned Arthur Miller experts and knew Miller really well, he got him to come and do an event at UEA. And so we were in this lecture theatre, and Miller read some extracts from the book, and then Chris Bigsby threw it open to the floor, and some guy in a bow tie stood up, and he said... I'm going to ask a question which I might have liked to have asked Shakespeare, but he is not available, as it were. So you'll do, as it were. I wonder how you feel about the fact that just recently, because this was the end of the summer term, just recently, thousands of young people across this country will have been answering exam questions about your work. And Miller paused for a moment and said, "I don't think anything about it at all." He's got a huge round of applause. Yeah, there it is. That's all. That's my Arthur Miller story.
There we go, bonus Arthur Miller material. Yes.
Robert, in terms of your writing this book, I've known you for quite a few years. The first time I met you, you wouldn't really talk about yourself. You talked about a guy called Harvey Matuso. And I saw two versions of that solo show that you performed, reviewed one of them. The second one had some rewrites.
Oh.
Then when I met you next, you didn't really want to talk about yourself, you were talking about Quint. And I saw two versions of that show as well.
Right.
And there've been a few changes as well, and that's what writers do, particularly when you perform live. This book, though there it is in print, is it finished?
I mean, the context of this is that when you say talk to you mean that you interviewed me rather than that I was sort of personally climbing up on. Is it finished? I don't know. Nothing's ever finished for me. I'm always fussy about stuff, but it had a lot of years to get finished and a lot of drafts. And in fact, even after it was finished to the extent of having been accepted for publication, there were more changes because we got to last summer, I think it was the previous autumn, autumn of the year before last, I was told that Hobart Books were going to publish it, and we didn't get down to the editing process until the end of last summer, at which point I learned that the editor had some reservations about certain things which hadn't been mentioned before, so it turned out that the editing process was going to be more intense than I thought. And one of the things was he thought the ending was weak, and actually when he said it I thought, yes it is. So I put a lot of work into rewriting about the last 8 pages or something. And I didn't change the outcome, but I changed just the tone of it. And there are a lot of other little changes. Once I get changing things, it's hard to pull me back. I think I was one of the more challenging writers for them that they've experienced in that. but you don't get a book published very many times in a life unless you're relatively few people. So it ought to be really as good as it possibly can, I thought. But yeah, it's probably.
So it's not finished then.
Who knows? It's good enough to read, and there will be copies available afterwards.
I have one sorry.
I just wondered, is there a film in there? Do you think?
I was going to, with a supplementary question, I was going to ask a similar thing and also say, would you add another string to your bow and write the screenplay? So can you answer both of those, please?
I think there's certainly a film in there. I wouldn't try to make it, but if someone said they had the money to make it and they wanted me to write the script, I would certainly be happy to do that. I have written 1 or 2 film scripts in my time, but of course none of them ever got made, with the exception of one very short film I made about the aforementioned traffic warden character Quint, which is called Autumn Patrol and can be looked up on YouTube if you feel so inclined.
And both Eric Cantona and Vinnie Jones act, so there you go. We could cast
That's
it here
true.
and now.
I've now remembered the thing that might have had some kind of because of course actually we were talking about this, you and I, the other day, and sort of plotting sort of the general structure of the evening, and Kung Fu came up. Reggie, which I have some experience of myself, it has to be said, and coming to think of it, Reggie gets a guy to come to his house every week or so and do Kung Fu classes for him and his friends and other people. But of course he's too ill-disciplined to actually take it seriously, and he ends up just arguing with the teacher and ends up on the floor rather humiliatingly, whereas Alex actually takes advantage of the opportunity and actually becomes quite good at it, and also ends up flooring Reggie a couple of times to his further humiliation. But Denise made the point that apart from my brief experience, I did learn Kung Fu for 3 years. I went to classes religiously for the first year and slightly less religiously the second year, even less religiously the third, and then I had to give up, or decided to give up, when I passed out a couple of times, which was probably from forgetting to breathe rather than anything more serious. But anyway, I did. And but Denise pointed out, of course, that there is a Kung Fu theme in the world of celebrity football, because, of course, Eric Cantona famously did a flying kick at that guy, at that yobbo who abused him. Who was it?
Crystal Palace.
Crystal Palace, yes, indeed. So yes, possibly that was in my mind as well. So maybe there's a bit of Eric Cantona in there as well, and why not?
And why not?
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Can I just being an actor, Robert, the reading was very, very good.
Well, thank you.
But do you think, I don't know how to explain, I think I know the answer to this, do you think because it's very wordy, it might stop people buying it because it's an actor's book? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I don't think it's true. I don't.
No,
think
I know
it's
that. I
actor's
know you were
book.
going to say that. I thought it might start a discussion.
Oh, okay. Anyone want to respond to that?
No.
You should do an audio book.
Well, I'd like to.
I think that would be great.
Yeah.
I think that's all on Radio 4.
I think it would appeal to people who like me, like reading aloud and doing the voices.
Yeah. If anyone knows anyone at Radio 4, they're very difficult to break down the door or even get a foot in it. But yeah. Dougie. Sorry. That's your job.
Quick answer to Paul who said that novels are never finished, they're only ever abandoned. But it also said that the first couple of novels...
Sorry, who said it?
People.
Okay.
You don't know them, but they're lovely. Other people also suggest that our first couple of novels may well be autobiographical. And apart from your experience with Kung Fu and possibly sub-editing, were there any aspects of this that you found to be autobiographical that you'd share with, or was this very much like you kind of got over that with the first couple of novels that you wrote?
Very little, I think. Probably got over that with the first one. The first unpublished novel which will stay thus was Come to Snog City, which I started as a play in the mid-90s, which was about a young man trying to make his way as a writer in late Thatcherite Britain in a seaside town and trying to find a girlfriend.
What was the biographical element?
That underwent many drafts over many years, and it never really escaped from its stage roots. I should have abandoned so much of the plot way back, but by the time I'd got to, basically, the better it got, the less possible it became to extricate it from the more unbelievable stuff. And the second book, of course, is rather less autobiographical, being also an adaptation of a play, I think more successfully adapted. Some people may have seen or heard from, well, Johnny directed it, in fact, a play I did called A Sustained Note of Fury, which was about a clown and his wife clearing up the caravan of his much more famous and better loved father's, who was also a clown. Now, as I say this, of course, though I am not a clown and never have been, though I played the part and learned to juggle for it, I expect there was probably some stuff about my own father being more at ease in his own skin than I ever have been, and though he wasn't a clown either, he dealt in scrap metal. Anyway, but yeah, I think probably most of that was out of my system by the time I came to be writing, or at least refining this.
Good. Any more questions for Rob?
Did either of those books have a happy ending?
In terms of the actual plots, you mean?
Yeah.
Well,
If they were autobiographical, in a sense.
Well, the first one actually ends with with him sort of asking whether he's going to go into ask himself whether he's going to go into a sort of fast food place and try to do something about the mad gunman who's just gone in there and started killing people.
So yes,
well, as is my wont, I sort of left it a bit open to question whether he was going to do so or not, but it was suggested that he would, because not to do so would be to very much sort of like chime with the vibe of Thatcherite Britain and kind of fuck everyone else, and even if he had to risk his life, it might be better than despising himself and never being able to look in the mirror again. But it was left open to question, and anyway, no one's ever going to read it, but what the hell.
You do like characters of extremes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, nobody likes to read a happy character, but at the same time, your characters are quite extreme, which is conscious decision to do that, or what?
Don't know.
Okay, fine.
I suppose I like characters that are larger than life, but then, you know, Reggie is, but then Alex isn't, but then, you know, probably wouldn't take too much sort of therapy to suggest that they're both elements of my own personality.
There you go. Therapy,
Without the running around
therapy is
sort of
writing.
like... I did go to Woburn once and I stayed safely in the car.
But had the idea. Well, Rob, thank you very much. It's been a very entertaining evening, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Rob will be staying for a little while to sign books, which you can purchase downstairs, so please do. And there's plenty of wine and water left, so do help yourself to another glass and stay and have a chat if you'd like to. Thank you very, very much.